This is Office Talk with Annette Stepanian. Welcome back to another episode of Office Talk. In this week's episode, I am talking to Lauren Pawell of Bixa Media all about email. We are constantly told why it's so important to develop our email list, and that is truly one of the few assets we own when it comes to our customers. The idea being that with social media, we don't own any of those channels, and so if social media goes away, how do we actually communicate with our customers? And the primary method is via email. So I wanted to bring Lauren on to share some of her best tips on how we can better utilize email marketing to not only create a connection with our customers, but also convert that into real sales. With that said, let's go to the show. Hey, Lauren, thanks so much for being with me today.
Hi, Annette. I'm super excited. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I just have to tell the story because you have been like one of my dream clients. You came to me a while ago and you were just so organized. You knew exactly what you wanted. And, you had this beautiful outline. And I think at the time I told you, I said like, you're my dream client. So organized. You know what you want. You're ready to get it done. It was so easy. So thank you for that. I wish everybody was like that.
Oh man. Let's just say a lot of learning lessons led me to be that way. So it wasn't always like that.
Awesome. Well, let's get to know you. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So my name is Lauren. I run a digital marketing agency called Bixa Media. I've been doing it for almost 6 years now, which is kind of crazy to say.
That is a little crazy.
Yeah. And it started out as primarily a web design shop. And what I learned with working with clients is that really they didn't want a website. I mean, they thought they wanted a website, but what they wanted was more business. And they thought a website was a way to achieve that. So inevitably the business evolved. And now after many iterations, what I primarily focus on is helping entrepreneurs with WordPress and Shopify sites generate and nurture more leads through their websites and other online marketing efforts.
Perfect. And that's really why I wanted to have you on, because in talking to the listeners and the audience, one of the biggest pain points that they have in business is generating more leads and then converting them. And so I thought you would be a really great person to talk to about how we could do that on an online platform, like via our website, via our email list. So let's take it like to the beginning. Kind of what are some things that people need to be doing as leads are starting to come into their website? So assuming they don't really have a traffic issue, but someone comes onto their website and they're doing their research. What are a few tips that you have for people about how they can take that lead and walk them down that customer journey and hopefully have a customer on the other end? That's a really general question, but you're an expert. I know you can go with it.
Okay, so I'd say that I have two answers to this question. So a little bit of it depends on how you acquire the lead. So is the lead coming in through some sort of lead magnet and they're just opting into a piece of content? Or is the lead filling out a form saying, I want to take the next step with you and I want to learn more about your services? So when you think about those two different leads, they're in very different stages of the buying cycle, right? The first is someone who's potentially just getting familiar with, your subject matter and what it is they want. They might not yet know what they want. Where the latter knows what they want, they're looking at you and potentially some competitors to help solve their problem, and they're almost ready to go. So in this case, the second type of lead, someone who's almost ready to go, should get really a different series of content to take the next step with you. Whether that's jumping on a call, you want to provide them with, okay, you filled out my form, here's what happens next. And you want to lead them fairly quickly into what happens next, right? So jumping on a call, making a purchase, providing some more information so that you can provide a proposal, whatever it is, that's what I would do in that case, which is fairly easy. When it comes to a lead who's earlier on in the process, they've opted into a lead magnet, there's a few different routes you can take, but you have to think about where the lead is and what they need to know before they're able to take the next step. And that's I always like to work backwards. Okay, I want someone to do this. What are all the things they need to know beforehand before they're going to be ready to do that? So frequently that includes learning a little bit more about who you are, learning what kind of services you offer, learning why you are the best person to help them. Maybe answering some frequently asked questions or common objections, and then obviously providing some sort of call to action, whatever that call to action is. And ideally, it's that same step on, okay, here's what you need to do to take the next step with me.
Okay. So I love that you said that so much of it is about where that lead comes from, which goes back to really putting yourself in that person's situation and understanding that. I think so oftentimes, we're so eager to sell our services or our products, we're coming at it from our perspective and not so much from, okay, where is this person on the journey and how do I need to speak to them based on where they're at. And I think of the example of you're still the same person, you're having the same conversations, but the way you present it is different. So you're going to speak differently to a 6-year-old than you are the president of the United States, right? You're going to carry yourself differently, although you're having you might be having the same type of, well, I don't know if you're having the same type of dialogue with a 6-year-old as you do with the president, but you might. Okay, that was funny.
That was good.
Yeah, that was good. Cha-ching! Okay. So basically the idea being that you have to first think about who it is I'm talking to, know your audience, and then kind of tailor that conversation towards them. So let's go to that first example of somebody who is earlier on in the buying cycle. Maybe you have an opt-in or something, a freebie. I think most people nowadays have that. But then they don't really know what to do after that, or they fall short. And you touched upon some things that you could do to kind of warm up that lead. Can you dive into that a little bit more and flesh it out for folks?
Yeah. So if someone's at the very beginning stage, how I like to think about them is they need significantly more education than someone who's farther along. So in some ways, you have to treat them as if they're totally new to the topic at hand. And what I like to do actually right off the bat is talk about why they came in through the lead magnet. Okay, you came in because you want XYZ, but what you really need is ABC. Because most of the time when someone's opted into a piece of content, they think they need something, but it's just a symptom of the greater problem. And what they actually need is far different from what they want. So let's take that web design example that I gave earlier in the evolution of my business. Let's say someone came in and said, to a lead magnet that was, 6 simple tips to create your website more quickly and more affordably. Okay, so at that point in time, they think they need a website, right? But what they really need is they need more business. So they might come in through that lead magnet and I might tell them, hey, thanks for downloading the lead magnet. Here's 6 ways on how you're going to get your website up and running quickly and cheaply. But let's talk a little bit about why you're interested in this piece of content. And I know you want a new website, but you want a new website because, you really want more business to come in through your website. So how can you achieve that? And then provide some education along those lines. Because already then by treating their kind of the psychology of why they came in, you're teaching them something. You're diving into the deeper reason behind why they're there. And they're already going to kind of associate a little bit of a win with you and your content. It's almost like a bank. Every piece of content that you're sending someone, or every email or every call, you're trying to just put one more coin in the piggy bank, right? You don't want to take out money of a piggy bank. You want to keep adding to it. So eventually your trust and your and your know factor, they don't have any questions about who you are and your authority, or should they trust you. So anyways, in the first email, typically I like to talk about why did you opt in and what do you really need?
Okay. And I think what you're trying to get at as well is that they're coming to you because they have a problem and they're looking to you for the solution, even though sometimes they're not always able to articulate what it is. So that's where you as the expert, I put it in air quotes, but you are an expert. That's where your role comes in. It's kind of like when you go to a doctor, you're like, I have this pain in my arm and I don't know what it is, but it hurts and I want to fix it. And so the doctor comes in and kind of does his diagnosis, right? Like they do their different tests and they're like, well, you have a sprained tendon. Do you even have a tendon in your arm? I don't know. So it's like your job to kind of diagnose that and say to them, okay, this is what you're complaining of. And then this is what it is probably likely is, and this is the solution. Like don't work out for 3 weeks. Don't lift anything heavy for 3 weeks and take some Advil and call me in the morning. So, okay.
Right. But if you start that email first by just talking about you and who you are and what, and your pricing, it's a little premature. They don't yet know whether you're even an authority to speak on the matter. So when you start by if you take that doctor analysis, when you start the email by saying, I understand your problem and here's what you really need, then you're already establishing some trust without ever having a sales conversation.
Okay, and so let's go to that second example. You said somebody's coming to you and they're filling out a form and they want to take that next step. So what are some things that you could do to qualify a potential lead at that stage? Because the reality is if you need to get on a sales call with, a 15-minute call with everybody, that's going to take up a lot of your time. So what are some things that people can do to really be efficient with their time and prioritize, who they're going to actually get on that call with and invest that time in to potentially convert them into a client?
Yeah, so I actually like to do that right in the form that someone has to fill out before they become a lead. So, typically they say the shorter the form is, the more likely someone is to fill it out. And yes, that's true. But not all leads are created equal. Your time is limited, as you mentioned. So when it comes to finding serious leads, I actually like to create longer forms and ask a series of very strategic questions that allow you to, when you get the response to the form, to see right off the bat, yes, this person's potentially a good fit, or no, I'm not going to be able to help them, or, they don't have the budget or whatever it is. So in that form, I typically always include a question about something related to budget, whether it's, what's your budget and here's a range of pricing, or maybe it's a question that's more about, just asking, do you have funds to invest in your business? Because oftentimes you'll find people fill out forms because they want free help, but they don't have any any resources, right? So I find asking that up front really helps you to determine, someone has $200. Okay, my service costs $3,000. I really can't help them, so I can't get on a phone call with them, right? Or you tell them, you respond to them an email and say, unfortunately, it's not a good fit. Some other things I like to ask is, what someone's struggling with, what is their desired end result, what's most important to them. That's a really nice qualifying question. You can order a few different things and say, rank from most important to least important. So speed, quality, results, service, there's a few different things you can include in there, because if someone says cost and speed are most important to me, that's a different lead than someone who says the quality and the results are most important to me.
Mm-hmm. And that's what conversation you have with them when you are on the phone. Yeah.
Exactly. So ideally you have enough information to go into a deeper conversation over the phone, because then you're not just having a preliminary sales call. You're able to demonstrate your authority, what you can do for them, because you're already talking about their individual situation.
Okay, cool. So now I'm going to jump back to the email, people who are on your email list. So we're assuming everybody's got their opt-in, they've got their welcome sequence. They're really good about sending emails. They're not falling off the face of the earth like 3 months at a time, then popping in and, recommitting to sending emails to their newsletter. So let's say somebody goes into your kind of initial nurture sequence. And so let's say it's a 14-day nurture sequence. At the end of that 14 days, you want them to buy a product from you. And then they don't. Okay, so then what do you do after that? What do you recommend your clients, or what do you see working with your clients? Do you continue to kind of put them in a different sequence and have a different conversation with them and then offer that product up again? Or do you just, I don't know, you tell me. Yeah. And I know this is a little kind of, I'm not giving you a concrete hypothetical to work with, but kind of what's going on in your head?
Yeah, so I think it depends a little bit on how that subscriber is interacting with the prior emails. So let's say you're selling a product and they don't buy, and subscriber A doesn't open any of the emails obviously doesn't click any of emails. Okay, that's one type of subscriber, right? But subscriber B opens the emails, doesn't click. And then subscriber C opens the emails and clicks, but doesn't take action. So you have three types of subscribers. In my personal opinion, where you spend the most time and effort is with subscriber C, the one who's interacted the most but hasn't taken the next step. So in that case, you may decide to send them a couple follow-up emails about that specific product because it looks like they're interested based on their interaction, or ask them why they didn't purchase. There's a few different approaches you can use, but you may stay on that product a little bit longer before you move them to something else. With subscriber B, I would likely move them to some sort of educational nurture series for a little bit and then transition them to a different product, because they've opened your emails, they like what you have to send, but they're just not interested in that product. And you can tell because they're not clicking through. For subscriber A, the one who hasn't done anything and hasn't opened, you would probably send them a few more pieces of content. And if they don't interact, then remove them from your list after requesting that they, click to stay on your list or something of the sort. But I don't like treating all subscribers equally because they just, based on their behavior, they're not the same type of lead. Again, it comes back to your lead quality.
That's really interesting because I've been going back through my emails and trying to determine, I'm always trying to cleaning up unsubscribes, all that, keep it very clean. And so I've noticed, okay, these people are an opening and then these people are opening, but I've never thought about how are they interacting? So of the people who are opening. So that's really interesting to kind of think about, where are you in terms of their attention to what you're saying and their engagement with what you're saying? So interesting.
Yeah. And I think something that people underestimate is just asking, hey, why didn't you buy? Because that can give you some really valuable feedback on the product. Maybe it's something as simple as they didn't have the budget. Okay, there's not a lot you can do about that. Or maybe you then know, okay, they're better suited for a lower price product. But if it's something like, well, I didn't really understand what you were offering, or I didn't like this aspect of the product, oftentimes you'll get really great feedback about something that you can change in the way you're presenting the product. Not to mention, anytime someone replies, you get better engagement. It's an engaged subscriber. And so okay, that person is interested in what I'm saying. I just haven't convinced them yet.
Okay. So one thing that I want to talk about, and it might be a little like too much, was about segmenting your list. So I'm going back to when somebody first approaches you and comes to your website and they opt in, or maybe it's not even at that point. Let's talk about segmentation because I really want to talk about it. It's kind of seems like it's like the kind of the cool thing to do nowadays, I think it's been a really good thing to do even before today, but I think people are kind of coming around to it and understanding the value of it. So can you talk about what segmentation is and why it's important?
Yeah, so the basic definition of segmentation is grouping your list based on different criteria. So the criteria could be behavior. So, are people opening? Are they not? It could also be in terms of interest groups. So, let's say, Annette, in your case, you might have segmentation based on someone who's an event planner versus someone who's a web designer versus someone who is, a jewelry maker. And they would each maybe receive different content based on that segmentation that would be personalized to their interest. So really what you're doing is grouping people, and by grouping them in a targeted way, you're able to have higher performance rates because you're speaking to a certain group of individual.
And so how have you kind of played with segmentation with your client work? And what have you seen kind of work really effectively? Because I think one of the things that I get confused about with segmentation is like there's so many segments that you could do, right?
Yes.
You could do like, male, female, like you said, like industry. It could be, have you started your business? Have you not started your business? There's so many things you could do. So how do you go about determining what segments to work to segment? Yeah, without overwhelming yourself.
Yeah, so that's the key to any sort of automation or segmentation is there's so much you can do that you really have to focus on where you're going to be most effective and what realistically you can accomplish. Because let's imagine in your case, you have 7 different customer groups across different industries. Are you really going to create 7 different emails every time you send out a marketing email, right? Maybe.
No.
But probably not.
I'll tell you the answer right there. No. You're lucky you're even getting one.
Right. So you have to think about realistically what you can accomplish. A very easy way to segment right off the bat that a lot of people overlook is customer versus non-customer. You can treat those two people very differently. Someone who's pulled out their wallet and actually paid you is a far different subscriber than someone who's never even gotten on the phone with you, let alone paid you for anything. So, for example, you might send different content to someone who's already paid you, notifying them about new products, telling them about updates to your products. That's one way to do it. For example, another way you could segment your customers is based on, you'll see this often now, is when someone comes into your opt-in, you'll give them 3 radio buttons that'll describe where they're at. I'm interested in this, I'm interested in this, or I'm interested in this, or this is my biggest problem, this is my biggest problem, or this is my biggest problem. So that can be a way to segment someone right off the bat. But then you have to remember that if you're going to segment them that way, then you have to deliver them different content. So if you're not able to do that, then don't start doing that yet. I think a very easy way to segment is based on behavior. Are they clicking? Are they opening? A lot of people overlook that, even though it's fairly basic. So until you get the basics down, I wouldn't start going down the path of let's create my 7 different customer groups. But an example of how this has worked well for a client, I've worked with a skincare client, and obviously their different subscribers have different skin concerns. So when someone comes in, they let the company know, I struggle with acne, I struggle with rosacea, I struggle with, dry skin. And based on how they respond, they're shown different products that correspond to their skin concern. Again,
it's like they're coming to you for that expertise and that diagnosis. And I know that was a skincare, so that fit in perfectly with that analogy. But maybe some of that just takes time for you to figure out what are the common complaints and concerns and problems that people are coming to me with. And then what is the majority of them, so you're always going to have these kind of like random, like quirky concerns maybe that people might have that they come to you to resolve, but it's the 80-20 rule. What are like 80% of the customers like concerned about? And you can break that down. And sometimes I think even let's say you've got 3 segments, like 2 of those segments, you could still speak to them in a very similar way. It's just the way that they're self-identifying their problem is phrased differently. But the solution, which is then your nurture sequence, is kind of the same. So, right? Okay.
Yeah,
I love this stuff.
I know. It's fascinating. But like you said, if you don't have enough data coming in to recognize patterns, then don't start segmenting in any sort of advanced way besides maybe by behavior, opens and clicks, and, customer versus non-customer. I wouldn't start diving into those different groups until you have a list that is giving you enough information about here's what people are concerned with.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take it back, even further back. And I'm thinking, what if someone's like, do I really even need an email list? Like, I'm presupposing that people understand the value because as we all know, you don't own your social media channels. You don't, all that good stuff that could go away in an instant. Or when was it? A few years ago, like Instagram just like deleted all like people's followers, like the fake bots or whatever. And like they all went down. I forget what it was called, but it was just really funny. All of a sudden they're like got a reality check, like crap. I don't really have as many followers as I thought. And so like what kind of successes have you seen with your clients when you invest and you really build a strong foundation when it comes to email marketing that you think people need to know?
Yeah. So it's funny because you mentioned everyone knows you need an email list. You would think that, but I've worked with some pretty big companies that just totally overlook email. They've spent all their time in social media, which is great, but they don't have any sort of anything coming after social media. What's next? So anyways, when you start investing,
I can see you just like rolling your eyes.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I can imagine you.
When you start investing in email marketing, one, it will quickly become the highest converting channel you have. I mean, just across the board, I've never seen that not be the case.
And is it because like people, they're giving up like by giving you their email address, they're giving you something that is very valuable and personal? Is it so by the virtue of the fact that they've signed up on your email list, they've already somehow committed to you, and so therefore they're more interested?
Yeah, I like to think of social media followers as like acquaintances, but email subscribers as like pretty close friends, right? Because by being on social media, by following someone, you basically said, yeah, I'll permit you to be in my feed. I might like stuff once in a while, but like, that's really it, right?
You're not, it's not invasive.
Yeah. But if I'm in your inbox, like I could be there every day. I could be there 5 times a day, and it's something you're checking all the time. So you're basically saying, hey, I'm not just going to open the door for you, but I'm going to invite you into my bedroom. Right.
Okay. I like this.
So, I like to think of social media as maybe the starting point to generating leads, but you want to convert those social media followers into email subscribers, because once they've done that, they're far more likely to become a customer. So typically when I'm working with clients, one, it becomes the highest converting channel, but it also becomes a significant source of their revenue. And they are really surprised. They don't always understand, oh my gosh, what have we been missing out on? So, and in addition, it really complements whatever they're doing on social. It, takes those efforts even farther. They get more results. So long story short, if you're not investing in email marketing, you should stop whatever else you're doing, focus only on email marketing, and then get back to everything else you're doing, or add it on top, because you will find that it will make up the bulk of your business.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm just like thinking about it, but it's true. And I see it, I see it in terms of engagement, like when you start looking at the numbers, you're like, wow, you get so much more of a connection with the people who are on your email list than you do really on social media in terms of just engagement, I think, in general. But that could just be me.
Yeah. And oftentimes you'll notice like your commenters on social are probably the same people who are opening all your emails.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't dug in that deep.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think people totally underestimate the value of email marketing, and oftentimes you can automate a lot of it, which is part of the beauty.
So let's talk about that, because I'm thinking, okay, if someone's listening and they're like, another thing to do, like I don't want to figure it out, and maybe they've started and it's just kind of been on the back burner, maybe they haven't. So what are some things that they could do right away that they could implement and maybe automate? I know everybody wants to automate right away, and you probably shouldn't automate everything right away, but some things you maybe can. I don't know. You tell us, like, what are some things that people, let's say like 3 things people can do that they can have an email list up and running, in the next week?
Okay. So let's say you haven't started at all. At the very least, I would add an opt-in to your website, create a welcome series, and link all that with your email service. Period. Nothing more.
End of story. Full stop.
Welcome series. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in that welcome series, you are talking about your products and services.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I didn't do that for a while. I didn't I was like, here's all this great information. And then I totally forgot to talk about what I offer.
Yeah. You're like, hey, I give away stuff for free. My business runs without any money. It's amazing.
Yeah. Don't make that mistake. Okay.
No, because you want someone who opts in to know that you're running a business, right? I mean, yeah, give away tons of great free content, but you don't want them the first time you promote something for them to be surprised and say, oh, I don't want this because it's not free, right? So, they need to know that you're someone who provides a ton of value for free, but you're also someone who sells something. So that would be where I'd get started. The next step to layer on to that would be, sending regular campaigns. It could be as little as once a month. It doesn't have to be as frequent as you might think. So what the path would be is someone would opt in on your website, they would receive the welcome series, and then after once a month, they would receive some sort of communication from you. So that would be like the very basic, what I would say pretty much everyone should have. If you want to add to that, there's a lot of things you can automate, but where could you get started? One, you could automate your customer onboarding experience. So let's say someone signs up for a service with you, they always run through these 5 steps and they need to do a few things, put that in an automated sequence of emails. And when someone becomes a customer, you tag them accordingly, and then they receive those emails and you don't have to send them manually. Same thing, post-purchase sequence. Let's say that you have some sort of product or a download, it would be a little different than what someone might receive if you're selling a service. But again, you'd send something automated. Annette, I know you do this when you sell your contracts. Someone buys them, then they receive, a few follow-up emails about, what's next? Do you have any questions? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And I need to always improve those. I have a list of like all these automations I need to go back and improve. But yeah, I always think about like, what it's a conversation you're having. And I think that's where if you can focus on that and just say, if I was talking to Lauren, who was my client, who came into my office and had a problem, or, what is that conversation I have face to face? And then you just put it over email, just as you were talking to a friend. Then I think it kind of takes that like scariness out of it and it makes it a little bit more approachable. And then you think about, if I was a customer, what would I want to hear, before I bought something, after I bought something, and have that conversation again. So after you buy something, it's nice when someone checks in on you to see how things are going, right? Like, it's like, hey, she's like thinking about me and I have an opportunity to like ask her questions or things like that. Like, it's just nice to know that someone is, I think especially in the follow-up, it's just so nice to know that people care and they're kind of checking in, just like, I guess, a doctor would, right? After you come in.
If you think about it from the standpoint that the person you're more likely to sell to, again, is a first-time customer or a customer, it's far easier to sell to them than it's going to be to sell to someone new. So by having that personalized follow-up, you're telling them you still care, and then you're creating an opportunity to make another sale. Mm-hmm. So, often a missed opportunity is in the customer follow-up. It's also a great time to ask, hey, do you mind giving me a review or giving me a testimonial? After you've obviously successfully fulfilled whatever they've requested. But, another missed opportunity a lot is, how can I take that customer, and even if they don't buy from me again, how can I take their experience and use it to sell to other people, which would be in the form of an online review or a testimonial.
Yeah. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. You broke it down, girl.
It is. People think that email marketing is super complicated, and it's far easier, in my opinion, than SEO, paid advertising, social media, and it has better results. At least from the standpoint of the last touch. The customer may have first come in through paid advertising or social media, but what's really going to drive the sale is going to be that email.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All good stuff. My brain is like, but we need to talk about this and we need to talk about that. But I think that's going to probably be overwhelming right now to the listeners. So we'll maybe have to have you back on to talk about just even how to generate these leads, So that's a whole other Oprah. But
it is.
I'd like to end off all of my interviews by asking you one question, which is the one thing I know for sure is, and I ask you to fill in the blank.
Okay, so the one thing I know for sure is we all have the same amount of time. It's something that we can't get back more of. So if we had to choose how we were going to spend our time on our business and what is going to be most effective, I know that it's email marketing.
I love it. I was like, is she going to say something about email marketing, or is it going to be something like kind of like philosophical? But you went with email marketing.
I could be philosophical too, but on that note, creating an email takes a lot less time than a lot of other stuff you're going to be doing. So if you can free up that time for personal fun, why not?
I love it. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Well, there you go. I hope this episode gave you a few more tips that you can utilize when you're developing your email marketing. If you'd like to learn more about Lauren, or if you'd like to grab the show notes, you can find that over at AnnetteStephanie.com/podcast/33. Also want to mention that when it comes to email marketing, there are laws that you need to comply with, specifically the CAN-SPAM Act. So what I've done for you is I've included a few bullet points about what the CAN-SPAM Act is and what it requires of you when you are engaging in email marketing. And you could find that over in the show notes as well. Again, that link is AnnetteStephanie.com/podcast/33. With that said, I hope you have a fantastic day, my friend, and I can't wait to talk to you later.